y'all, atheist TikTok be wild and bad, and this is what I mean. So last night I randomly hopped on this atheist live because he was telling people like, hey, prove to me that God exists. So there was a lot of Christians calling in, and you could tell they really just were not comfortable defending the faith. I mean, they really sounded like new Christians, which to me is like low-hanging fruit. Now normally I don't do this type of thing, but I said let me go ahead and let me hit this button, the request to join button. Next thing I know, I'm on there and I'm like, oh snap. So he's like, next caller, and I'm like, my voice is shaking a little bit, sound like I'm out of breath because I'm like, Lord, I don't know what I'm gonna say. Help me, Holy Spirit. But I started off like this. I said the fine-tuning of the universe is one reason that people believe God exists. So in other words, things are so accurately placed. Like if anything changed, if we were further away from the sun or too close to the sun, or further away from the moon or too close to the moon, like we would be dead. Like there's just too much order in creation to assume that no one created something out of nothing. But then I changed up a little bit and I slid over into like the historical Jesus, because a lot of people think that you can't find out any information about Jesus outside of the Bible, when that's just not true. So I said people like Tacitus and Pliny the Younger and Josephus wrote about Jesus early on. Tacitus was a Roman historian, Josephus was a Jewish historian, and Pliny the Younger, I think, was like a Roman governor or something like that. But they're not the only ones. It's like Lucian of Samosata. There's other people, but you know, just to name a few. And I'm glad I went that route, because that got him to admit that the historical Jesus actually exists. And I think one of the reasons he was okay admitting that is because apparently he listens to Bar Ehrman, who is, I think he's an ex-evangelical, but super smart guy. Like he's a maybe he's a New Testament scholar, but he's not a Christian. I think he claims to have been a Christian, but deconstructed. Now has written several books trying to debunk Christianity. So then I said, okay, Bart Ehrman is not the only scholar. So I listed people like Gary Habermas. Gary Habermas has been studying the resurrection for longer than probably anybody that's alive right now. Mike Licona, he wrote a book with Gary Habermas. Who else? You got Michael Heiser. He's a scholar. I miss Michael Heiser. So we went back and forth for a little bit, and then he finally just kind of started muting me, wouldn't let me talk. But another thing I started pressing him on was the empty tomb, because I'm like, bro, you say that Jesus existed, so where's his body? And then he was like, somebody stole his body and they probably threw it over a cliff. And I'm like, who stole the body? And how did they get the body with the Roman soldiers guarding the tomb? Like they would have died if they had let somebody steal the body. Not to mention the Bible talks about like how Jesus's disciples were afraid, you know? What does it say? When Jesus was arrested, like all of them scattered like little wimps. And the Pharisees and the Roman government would have had no reason to steal the body, because they were trying to silence Jesus in the first place, right? Like they had literally just killed the man. I didn't get a chance to say all of that last night, but I digress. I also asked him like, okay, if Christianity is not true, or if the gospel is not true, why is there a Christian church? So he said that the Roman government created the church. And I was like, then why were they persecuting Christians? And he was like, because Christians were polytheists. I was like, the Romans were polytheists. What are you talking about? Because the truth is, Christians were being persecuted because they were not polytheists. They were worshiping Jesus as God. So the Jews didn't like that, and the Romans didn't like that, because they refused to worship the emperor, you know, Caesar. Caesar was not being worshipped by Christians, and they didn't like that. So clearly bro was just grabbing for straws, making stuff up, speculating, because one of his statements was, what's more likely, that Jesus rose from the grave or that someone stole his body? And the answer should be, where does the evidence lead? Now, if Jesus did rise from the grave, which is what Christians believe, that is a pure miracle, right? But miracles are not impossible. Every worldview depends on at least one miracle, even atheists. Because again, if you're an atheist, you have to believe that everything came from nothing for no reason at all. Like, that's a miracle. And if that happened, if there was evidence of that happening, then I would say, hey, I mean, what are you going to do with that? But the evidence is not on the atheist side, not scientifically and not historically, which is another thing I asked him. I was like, okay, so scientists affirm, most of them will say, yeah, the universe had a beginning, which is why so many of them talk about the Big Bang. You don't have a beginning of anything without a cause. So he tried to say that, the universe don't have no beginning. All right, bruh. Anyway, that was my conversation with the atheist on that live. So yeah, that's it. That's all. I said all that to say Listen, I know there was a lot of Christians who was talking to this guy, and this happens every day on TikTok. You got all different types of religions, whether it be the Hebrew Israelites or Muslims on here or atheists, who try to argue and debate Christians and try to make Christians look stupid. Some Christians are better at debating it than others. Again, I'm not like the best apologist or theologian or anything like that. I'm a regular lay person like most of y'all. I got a pastor, I go to Bible studies, all that kind of stuff, right? I'm just trying to learn out here like everybody, but I do pray for boldness, and I think all Christians should pray for boldness. Every debate is not going to be your best debate. You're not always going to have the right answer, and that's okay, because sometimes not having the right answer pushes you to go research it. And so how else you think you're gonna learn? You gotta do research, pick up a book, Anyway, that's it. That's all. Don't be scared of these atheists and whatnot, because a lot of them really don't know what they be talking about anyway.